Hello everyone, thank you for the opportunity to interact with you all. Today my topic is going to be on how we can use science as a conscience of reality. And you've heard two previous sessions which specifically spoke about a certain area of the science and made it simplified in a simplified version to all of you. But today I'm not going to focus on any particular area of science or academic field or professional fields of science, but in fact, instead of that, what I would like to present to all of you is that how we can use science as a method to lead a life of meaning. And here I do not claim to say that science can be used as God, because I do not personally believe in the concept of God as such. So what I want you to take about is, when we want to understand science as a method, we are living in 21st century, and especially those of us who are fortunate enough to be born in a relatively open society, which has a secular democracy in it, we are cultivated a culture of having questions about anything. We are made to believe that you don't have to take anything at face value. You have to question and analyze it before you come to any decision. That is, all of our day-to-day decision-making processes which we do actually consists of a method of science in it. To illustrate that, let me take you through some of these slides which are related to our personal decision-making in our day-to-day life. If you look at this first slide, if you want to buy a house, what would you usually do? You will come up with so many questions. You would like to understand all the steps of buying a house, what to look for when you are buying, what questions to ask, understand the hidden cost in it, and how to close a deal on it, right? And if you take another example, when your loved one is suffering with a disease, say for example cancer or surgery, and you want to take a decision about going for surgery or for chemotherapy, say, you would not go for first opinion by a particular doctor. Before you decide on it, you would definitely take a second opinion and sometimes maybe a third opinion. Why? Because you have so many questions before you come to your final decision. Like, what type of diagnostic test do you perform? What does my diagnostic testing tell me? What are the different treatment options available to me? Based on the different treatment options, which is the best suitable for me? What happens if the treatment approach does not work for me? What are the side effects and how can I manage it? If you take a day-to-day activity like cooking, there also, if you're fond of coming up with a new recipe, what we usually do is we experiment it randomly with ingredients until we come to a stage where we have specific ingredients and measurements of ingredients which can produce a delicious dish for our dinner, say. So in all of these examples, we are doing you have to observe that we raise questions regarding it, and we do a lot of testing and experimentation. If you want to buy a house or even want to rent a house, you would not settle at the first house you visit. You would go for the second, third, or the fourth house, compare each other, and then you come to a decision. Especially, this is more relevant for those of you who have a kid. If you want to have an admission to the school, you would like to know if the school which your child is going to go offers the best of resources. More importantly, is it equipped to meet the future? Can it imbibe the best coping capabilities for your child? Those are the personal relevant examples on a personal level. Even if we take some of the global problems which we are facing today, like the global climate change or the resurgence of infectious diseases, for example, the most relevant is this COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak. Again, questions arise in our mind. How do I protect myself from this disease? If I acquire, what is the fatality rate? What is the chance of me becoming dead? These are the questions which come. If it is about greenhouse gases which we are emitting, what is the effect on the health of the individuals or on the planet? And some of us even might be taking some of these steps in our lifestyle changes. What lifestyle change I can make to contribute to a sustainable living in this global crisis which we have. So all of these, whether they are personal, individual level problems in our life or global level challenges, what we are trying to understand is what is the reality. That is, what is the state of the things as they are? rather than they are imagined to be. That is, we would like to understand the actuality of it, the fact of it, or the materiality of it, which is opposite to fantasy, illusion, or fiction. All through our lives, whether it is a day-to-day task or a major life-changing decision, we are fighting between this. We want to understand the difference between what is a fiction and what is reality, because we want to lead a life which does not manipulate us. We want to know the difference between fiction and reality, because reality is the totality of a system, both known and unknown, because every one of us are living in a world which is true to only us. We might know many things and we might not know so many other things which are unknown, and that thirst towards knowing that is reality. But in this process of knowing what is real and what is fiction, the conscience is something which has a moral underpinning for our behavior. That is, a person's moral sense of right or wrong. How to decide if this path I'm choosing is right or is it wrong. A guide to one's behavior. That is, if you take the Oxford Dictionary definition, it says conscience is a cognitive process that elicits emotion and rational associations based on an individual's moral philosophy or value system. You cannot escape from this value system which upbrings us. We are accidentally born into a particular family, to particular parents, to a particular, if they are following a particular religion, we are taught that. And that value system or a philosophy might be biasing us towards, or it might be guiding us to have a particular perception about the reality. And that's why if you look at the underlined words there, one is the emotion involved there, and another is the rational associations. What we need to understand here is the emotion involved should not overpower our rational associations. And that's when you can say it's a guide to one's behavior. Not just the emotion, but the rational associations. And for us to have an understanding of how we can have this rational guide to life, which balances both the emotional component as well as the rational associations, the best tool available to us is science. Because simply put, I do not want to put a definition of science in a very academic manner. Simply put, science can be thought of as an amazing human invention. We have invented this methodology called science. In fact, it's a huge community effort to discover truth through repeated cycles of testing and self-correction. In the previous examples when we saw, that's what we do in our day-to-day life. We repeatedly undergo our decisions and we learn from our previous problems by repeated cycles of testing and, of course, self-correcting ourselves. And that is, in fact, what we mean by science. Therefore, science is also, it cannot become a belief system. It's a very special way of learning about the true nature of the observable world. So what is the method of science for life? If you put it into a more clearer perspective, it is nothing but the repeated cycles of testing and self-correction. Even the research which we take up in our particular field, I come from a public health dentistry background. We do a lot of research on the social factors or the economic factors and its impact on the health of the individuals. We may conduct many research designs starting from just observable studies or to case control or cohort studies. But in any of these research designs, one thing which is very basic is repeated cycles of testing and self-correction to get the best available evidence at that point of time. Secondly, it's a constant effort to update our positions on as many things as possible. That is, it indicates towards our open-mindedness. Science can never be arrogant. It can never say that I propose you the ultimate truth, because it is open for self-correction, and that should also become our attitude, a way of life, so that we can have a self-examined life. Am I going right or wrong? We can learn to contradict ourselves in a regular basis, and that is how, in fact, we can understand how the natural world works. If you look at, I said about emotions before. Even if you take emotions such as kindness, compassion, and love, these are the basic human values which are necessary for us to coexist together in a harmonious way. And science has shown us that these emotions which we feel in our hearts, which we feel like we feel in our hearts, which are actually happening in the brain and the several biochemical processes which are guiding our endocrine systems to produce certain hormones which will make us more likable by another person or tolerant of other people. It is all showing us that these are not the emotions which are just isolated by themselves. Science is showing us these can be learned as a skill. Once you know that kindness, compassion, and even love is a skill set, that means there is an opportunity for anybody to learn them. Now you can't say that I can't learn how to love. Love is not, I'm not referring just the romantic love here, the all-encompassing love. And that's why we are able to see through our experimental psychology research or sociological research that even in a war-hit countries like Syria, a Syrian refugee is shown comforting a stray dog on roadside. He himself is suffering with so much of with unrest and emotionally and sociologically traumatized, but he has still retained the capacity for compassion. And by studying them, we will be able to understand the underpinnings of what's happening in our biological system in the human body and how can we actually imbibe them to use them for the greater society. If you look at the other examples which we see in lives, we have caste system, we have patriarchy, we have gender inequality, we have honor killings which take place in the name of superiority of a particular caste. Religion and superstitions, or theory of evolution versus the God's creation, and we even have people, a cult of people who believe, even today they believe that earth is flat. No matter how long you debate with them, argue with them, show them the best evidence, they still come up with saying that the earth is flat. And if you look at David Rake's work on race, it shatters all our illusions which we had about purity of race. We are extremely mixed, as the quiz master was giving you the questions. We are even able to understand that some plant product like banana can have similarity with human beings. That's why it is important for us, again, to translate whatever is happening in the science field to usable tools which we can apply in day-to-day life. The basic tools of the science which are very much useful to our day-to-day life are the critical thinking tools. And creative thinking is like basically nothing but open for new ideas, you're flexible to come up with solutions to problems and other things. The other aspect of thinking where we have to use critical thinking is because if you leave it to itself, much of our thinking usually, if you don't train it properly, if you leave it to itself, it is usually biased, distorted, partial, uninformed, and it will be downright prejudiced. And that's why we need to take our thinking apart and analyze it. It's what we call reflective thinking. That is thinking about our thinking. What am I thinking? Is it right or not? How do we? The primary question here is, at least in our day-to-day life, especially when we are living in a digital world where we are bombarded with so much of news from all the platforms of social media and your TV channels and newspapers, we need to know how to pass the good from the bad. So the three primary concepts which we need to understand are what is a fact, what is an assertion, and what is an opinion. And if you come across a statement, you should be able to at least know if that statement is a fact or an assertion or an opinion. So what do we mean by fact? Fact is something demonstrably true. This is very important for us to understand. If a statement says something, but it should be demonstrably true. For example, water flows downhill, plants grow towards sunlight. It is something that can be checked, it can be verified, and it can be confirmed to be true. That is what is a fact. Whereas assertion is a statement which is held to be true, but which is not actually a fact because it is not or cannot be proven to be true. Whereas opinion is even weaker than an assertion because it's a statement of something that is believed to be true, but it is subjective and is dependent on the point of view of a person who is making the judgment, which is believed to be true. So it's absolutely not demonstrable at all. So even I have a quiz for all of you. Look at this statement. The planet Mars is smaller in diameter than Earth. Is this statement a fact, an assertion, or an opinion? It's a fact. Second, Mars was named after the Roman god of war because it has reddish appearance. Is this statement a fact, an assertion, or an opinion? What do you think? How many of you think it's an assertion? Now the confusion starts. Okay. How many think of you this as an opinion? Okay. Let's look at the third statement. Mars is beautiful. Is this statement a fact, an assertion, or an opinion? It's an opinion. Fine. Well, the first question, of course, it was a fact because you can demonstrate that Mars is smaller in diameter than the Earth. Second is an assertion because it is reasonable and generally accepted explanation of the origin of the name of the planet, but it is not possible to prove it objectively by observation, experimentation, or measurement. You can't prove it. You can just take it as an assertion. Of course, third one was an opinion because even though it might be shared by all, but it necessarily may not be true. That's why in science, in the research, whenever we refer to this hierarchy of evidence. If you read an opinion editorial in a newspaper or expert opinions also, narrative reviews, even expert opinions by the medical professions or any experts they fall always at the lower level of evidence. So please keep in mind, whenever you are reading or coming across anything, don't take anything completely at face value. This becomes especially true because now on January 1st, 2020, UNICEF usually every year, on the first day of every year, it records how many babies are born that day. This year, on January 2020, first day, a little over 392,000 new babies were born on that day. And if we take up the average life expectancy of a girl who is born today, it's around 79.6 years, and a boy who is born today, life expectancy is around 76.2 years. That means all those babies who are born, they are going to live into the 22nd century. And their children, they are going to live into the 22nd century. And the world they are going to live in is going to be fundamentally different from what it was or what their parents knew. So, and at that too, you must all be knowing the unpredicted scale of speed, the artificial intelligence and biotechnology and all that genetic editing, all these are going. The speed is so fast that the experts are already warning us that we may not have the ethical guidelines suitable to guide us into a life in front of us. That is, all the philosophy and the ethical guidelines which are there right now, they were suitable maybe for all these centuries. But now we are coming up with a life which is so unpredictable and so out of control. That's why we need to have a very, very important moral responsibility to have, to ground us to the reality again, very importantly. So why it is important? Because we are bombarded with these three major entities all the time, every minute. One is fake news, the second is illusory truth effects and propaganda. Why we believe what we believe? Why we believe so much of it? We know that we live in post-truth era and we are bombarded with fake news, but still we tend to believe them. That's because we tend to pick up false beliefs for the simple reason that we have heard them a lot. That's the simplest of reasons why we believe what we believe in this era. For example, if you take coronavirus outbreak, how the misinformation spread, creating panic. Even a scientific paper claiming that it's a new kind of a snake flu went viral online, and other misinformation was like it's a virus part HIV, and conspiracy theories like it's a bioweapon, it's linked to people eating bat soup, population control method, and even a spy operation, etc., etc. How to tackle these online rumors? The best way is to treat them like real life virus and stay away from these misinformation. But how do we know that these are misinformation or fake news? This is challenging because it's very difficult for us to know if this is a fake news or real news. It is because when we are bombarded with repeated news from different channels, we all have a tendency to believe something is true after being exposed to it multiple times, and this makes us believe that it is true, and that is what is called illusory truth effect. And this happens at the brain level because the brain has cognitive shortcuts, because thinking is very hard work. It requires a lot of energy. Though brain is around 2% of the body weight, it consumes 20% of the body's energy needs. So evolutionarily, the cognitive shortcuts are built in the brain. So it is easy for the brain to process something which is fluent and very attractive and does not need much of the hard work. Who is going to go through the Google source and again go to the scientific paper source and again go to the hyperlink and check whether it is a credible source or not? If it comes to a WhatsApp source, we just might tend to believe it. And most of these news will be statements presented as easy to read color and aphorisms that rhyme, very easy for the brain to catch up. For example, what sobriety conceals, alcohol reveals. Very nice to catch it, and it stays in our mind. Another aspect which helps the fake news to spread is the propaganda. Propaganda is nothing but about convincing people of the validity of a particular cause. Propaganda can be used by both bigotry propagating people, or even by people who are fanatics about science. Both extremes are not good for humanity anyways, but not always propaganda is used, should be necessarily malicious. Sometimes the cause is improved public health. For example, family planning, personal hygiene, etc. For example, if you take propaganda by government about the benefits of hand washing, it produces advertisements that be a germ buster, wash your hands. It produces good positive examples, results, but not always. Most of the times, propaganda is used for imposing in a very persuasive manner. It will not use force and impose upon you, but it will persuade you to believe it by manipulating your thinking. How does it do? One of the best types of propaganda is what is called fire hose propaganda, which uses high volume and multi-channel. All your different social media, TV channels, Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, rapid, continuous and repetitive. Many times it keeps coming. Your friends are sending the same news. Your relatives are sending the same news. Your work colleagues are sending the same news. In TV channel, if you open a channel, that also is telling you about the same thing. So it is repetitive, it is continuous, it is rapid, makes no commitment to objective reality, makes no commitment to consistency. This is the fire hose propaganda. Best example I can give, because I come from a public health background, is the anti-vaccination campaign, which is taking a bigger hold among the masses. In the year 2016 alone, in India, what we saw was there was an opposing measles rubella vaccination drive which went viral on WhatsApp targeting parents. It caused panic among parents. And in 2016 alone, 49,200 deaths of children happened due to measles in India. And this is not reported as a headline in newspapers. That is the problem. What the journalism focuses, the mainstream journalism decides to focus, is something which may not be useful to us. But this goes out of our vision. What propaganda does, or how it aids fake news, is it does more than spreading fake news. It causes paranoia, mistrust, suspicion, and contempt for expertise. You will start suspecting the doctors who are giving vaccines to you, and you will start believing the WhatsApp messages. Because now you may think conspiracy theories would have come, that doctors are, because already medical field is corrupted, we are very unethical doctors, so people are already mistrusting you, and they may think that it is true that doctors are hand in gloves with all this money-making industry of pharmacy. Pharma is a very big money-making industry now, and we know that. So it catches on those loopholes, the propaganda. All of this makes future propaganda more effective. First impressions are powerful. Please, we can remember that, because familiarity breeds trust, and it embarks upon all those loopholes. So what can we do? The first thing what can we do is that we can research unfamiliar sources before trusting them. So that requires a little bit of hard work for our brain and use some of our energy more than, it's not going to be easy like consuming fake news. Secondly, you can be cautious of sites that are funded entirely by advertising, or that pay their journalists based on views. How many clicks, how many views. Now we live in digital online era, YouTube and all that, we become popular. That is really masking something which is actually the actuality, which is closer to reality. And thirdly, seek to support reader-funded news sources you get value from if possible. And we should always remember that we have a notoriously and naturally disposed brain. We are disposed to overestimate our intellectual strengths. We are disposed evolutionarily like that and underestimate our weaknesses. That's what we usually do. If you self-introspect yourself, if you self-examine yourself, you see that we are notoriously disposed to overestimate our strengths. So maybe we need to inculcate or cultivate something called intellectual humility. What I know may not be, unless I investigate it and see, let us be humble about what we know. Another important thing I just want to touch upon is what is called bad science and pseudoscience. We always hear about pseudoscience, but bad science is also there. It is nothing but a flawed version of good science with the potential for improvement. There must be some errors and biases in the methodology used by these scientific researchers, but there is a room for improvement because we can identify, other researchers can identify there is a flaw in the research. Best example which went actually very popular in around 3, 4, 5 years back, I think, is Amy Cuddy. In the psychological research I have taken up, you can see her picture. She is demonstrating her theory of power posing with a photo of comic book hero Wonder Woman. She said that if you power pose like this, you will there will be an increase in your self-esteem and confidence. It will boost you, and if you can power pose before you, maybe for example before you give an interview, job interview, power pose it every day morning when you get up, power pose yourself in front of the mirror, and it's going to improve your quality of life. She told that based on a study which involved just 42 participants. Initially, when this study was published, it became extremely popular, but later almost 11 studies, follow-up studies which were done could not prove her results. That it was just subjective reporting by the participants, and the sample size which was used by the study was just around 42, which might be very good for a pilot study maybe, but not for a main study. And all the participants were giving self-reporting data, which is usually not well validated in the field of research. This is a bad science, and there was no blinding which was involved. All these flaws, limitations of the research findings were later found out, and it was disproved later. So what is the red flag here? We can just keep this in our mind whenever we read something in the news or in any of these social media platforms. It's a good idea to be skeptical of research promising anything too dramatic or extreme with minimal effort, especially without substantial evidence. If it is claiming that there will be a dramatic or extreme outcome with minimal effort, become suspicious about it. If it seems too good to be true, it most likely is. Like in any other parts of the life you apply, it's the same thing with bad science. But pseudoscience is something which has no basis in scientific method at all, whereas bad science uses scientific method but is flawed in its design, has some errors and biases. But pseudoscience is absolutely no science at all. It does not attempt to follow standard procedures for gathering evidence. It may actually instead adopt the appearance of the actual science to look more persuasive. So how do you distinguish from good science, both bad science and pseudoscience? We need to know what is good science. Good science is about evidence. It is not about reputation. At the same time, it is also not about proof. Good science is about evidence, and evidence can always be discredited. Please know this. It is not about reputation. It is not even about proof, because evidence can always be discredited by later investigations, and that's how science has progressed all through this life. Examples, of course, for pseudoscience, Hindu god Ganesha. By showing him, we say that we had ancient cosmetic surgeons, fuels made of donkey urine, another ancient technology. And there is something called Campaign Against Pseudoscience using law and ethics. It conducted a study. It found out that we spend around 400 crores of rupees every year on advertising, spent on advertising. See, about 35.9% of advertisements were on curing sexual disorders, 8.41% curing diabetes, 7 to 8% talked on beauty care. At least 80 to 90 advertisements are seen in various media each day, which are not bad science, but they are completely not science. They are pseudosciences. So to conclude this session, I would just like to end with this quote by Jules Verne. It says that science, my lad, is made up of mistakes. But they are mistakes which it is useful to make because they lead little by little to the truth. As I was telling in the beginning, science is not at all arrogant. It is as open-minded as this quote. You have some idea, you present it as a hypothesis, you test that hypothesis, whether it is proved or disproved through the research. And maybe it is proved, maybe after 10 years, some other scientist comes along and disproves your theory or a hypothesis. Science is open for it. With open-hearted welcome, it welcomes all possibilities in front of us, and we can use this in our day-to-day life. That's how our thinking should be. That's how, especially important because we are giving birth to children who are going to live into the 22nd century in a digital world where we always look for clicks, more number of clicks, popularity, and all that, and post-truth era. So thank you all for patient listening. And I would like to thank Anish for approaching me in the beginning. He was the one who told me about Essence Bengaluru. I was totally unaware of this organization, whether it was in Kerala or where I was not at all aware. And Srijit, and all those who are involved in the committee for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Opinion and assertion, but I feel like there are only two because you gave an assertion that Mars is named after the Roman god, correct? And this is an opinion because it's written in a book. You said you are an atheist, right?
No, the complete sentence is, it is named after a Roman god of wars because of its reddish appearance.
Okay.
Yeah, so that reddish appearance and all, we can't
what my point is that this would still be an opinion because the idea of a Roman god is based on a book.
Yeah.
So it can't really be based because if you are agreeing to believe in a book or whatever is written and then base that as assertion, then the entire theist arguments are also true. Like I can say something like the earth is flat and people can say it's an assertion, it's not an opinion, which kind of breaks it down, which is why...
Yeah, the distinction between assertion and opinion is extremely subjective. Only one person's point of view on how he or she feels about it, it's very emotional and opinionated. Whereas assertion is, for a very long period of time, it's been believed and accepted by the general population. It may not be a fact, but it's not pertaining to a single person or a very cult form of a group or anything. It's not a cult which is believing, okay, flat earth group is a cult. It's not even, you can't compare a cult relatively to a general population. General population, the common people are better than a cult actually. We don't want to become, science should never have cults, first of all. So assertion is the distinction is that.
Okay.
It was assumed for a very long period of time. It's named after the Roman god of wars because it appears red when we see it. But it remains only an assertion, can never become an opinion also. If I alone say for example, if I say moon has the same density as cheese. Okay. So I alone will be saying that for a long period of time. Nobody else may agree with me. That becomes an opinion. But instead, if any of these pseudoscience people, if they want to persuade you to believe something as ridiculous as that, they may say that the density of the cheddar cheese is similar to the density of the moon. Then you will start believing maybe it might be true because it includes all those words and phrases of density of the cheddar cheese, maybe comparable in physics to density of the moon, but it's still not going to be a fact. It might remain as an assertion maybe. But it can, if I say it looks like a cheese to me, it will remain as an opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I forgot to say, these are the references I took. I do not take credit to this slide. I have used these references and I have passed on whatever I have learned to you.
Ma'am, you said science is not arrogant. It's open to new information, new evidence, and it builds upon itself,
Yes.
correct? So how would you respond to a religious person when they say, when they argue for the existence of a God, saying that, okay, since science is not arrogant, leave aside your arrogance and consider that God exists. No.
Because science says, as
I'm an
the
atheist, by the way.
Yeah, no, it should not matter. Anybody can answer that, can ask that question. Not that an atheist only should ask that question, right? The best quote I can remember is Christopher Hitchens' quote. So if you assert anything without evidence, you can dismiss that without evidence. I mean, we need, that's why I put it out there. Science is about evidence. It's not about reputation. It's not even about proof, providing proof. We don't have to provide a proof because only then you can keep it open-minded. Because evidences can later be disputed, right? Yeah.
For managing the time, please excuse for the other, those who have questions, can you please take it offline because we are rushing through the program. Please excuse. Thanks a lot, Dr. Sushi.
Neurons English is your one-stop free thinking channel. Subscribe now and get instant alerts on videos from Essence Global.